Welcome everybody, it's Unstoppable Streletsy here, and I got somebody very special with me today to talk about Age of Empires 3 stuff. I got Sandy of Cthulhu, Sandy Petersen, one of the original designers of the Age of Empires series.
Yes,
So,
indeed. Am I visible to them, or should I turn off my camera?
I don't think they'll be seeing your camera since I'm doing just a regular image backdrop
Okay,
here.
awesome. I'll turn it off. So, hey, yeah, I will say that to be clear, Rick Goodman was the main designer on the first Age of Empires. So I came on near the very end of that, and then I was involved, of course, intimately with all the rest.
Very nice indeed. So, for those that don't know, we're going to be doing these interviews as 4 separate episodes, with this being episode 1. Episode 1 will focus on just getting to know Sandy, what he did for AoE, and any sorts of cool facts. So, hope that you enjoyed this one, and then as we move along, we'll be getting into more AoE related topics and sort of figuring out what he thinks about everything present and future with the series. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. So, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do a Q&A session? Do you want me to ramble about stuff I did?
Uh,
What works for you?
it's up to you. Which mode do you think would be better for the audience from your side?
Um, I mean,
It's whatever you feel comfortable with too. If you feel
okay,
like
why don't I
you
mix it
love
up?
Ray.
So I will start with a story, and then you can ask questions. How does that?
So
Which Age of Empires are you most keen on talking about?
I think for the purposes of our series, we're mostly going to be focusing on Age of Empires 3, but I'll sort of delve a little bit into AoE 2 and Age of Mythology with the stuff that I put together a few weeks ago.
Okay, so on Age of Empires 3, I was not the lead because when the project started, they had me doing the Conquerors expansion for Age of Empires 2. As soon as the Conquerors finished, I went on to Age of Empires 3, and I became like the second um, the second designer after Greg Street. So my job on Age of Empires 3 was to balance the civilizations, to uh, to to help make sure the maps were all fair, to design the various little Native American civilizations, to do this, basically all the stuff that controls the game. The overall top design Greg Street was doing, he was concerned with the campaign, and making sure that worked together. And he came up with the fundamental ideas that made the game different from previous ages. For example, the home city, which I thought was actually at first it was really hard to get working right, but I think it was a genius idea and actually gave you a sort of an ongoing character you could play in an age game, which we RTS game, which we'd never seen before. You know, so I will say this about Age of Empires 3 that I think your people might find interesting. With one of the things that we did with the Age of Empires series is that we would get a working version of the game up as soon as possible and then play the hell out of that until we were sure it was fun. Then we'd start adding features to the game, being careful not to wreck the fun, so that the idea was that when the game came out, we knew for a fact it was fun. Age of Empires 3, of all the ages, took the longest to become fun. For the first year of testing it, we weren't happy with how fun it was. And we were starting to panic because the other games were fun within a month or two. And we couldn't figure out what we were doing wrong, if we what we needed to add or take away to make sure it was a fun game for the player. To give them enough to do so they weren't bored, and not so much to do they were overwhelmed. And when we finally played it, and everyone had a great time, we looked at each other and said, "Okay, we got it. Don't lose this. Let's keep going from here." Our technique was different from almost every other RTS company's technique. they would just start the game and make it, and then they would do their playtesting near the end. Whereas, like I said, we were doing it right from the start. Greg and I went to a meeting at the Game Developers Conference, and the guys who did Red Alert were giving a talk about how to playtest. And we thought we should go hear that because we are very keen on playtesting. And the Red Alert guy said, "You need to playtest a lot." And me and Greg looked at each other and nodded, "Yes, that's right." And it's interestingly, by the way, Greg Street was kind of my protege. I hired him to Ensemble and kind of worked and trained him as a game designer. So I was pretty proud when he actually became the lead on Age 3. Anyway, so we said, yes, you have to do a lot. Then the Red Alert guy said, you have to playtest a ton, far more than you think. And me and Greg looked at each other, yes, that's right. You have to do it tons more than you think. And then they said, we had to playtest Red Alert for 3 whole months. And then Greg and I had to mask our laughter, because at that time we'd been testing Age 3 for 18 months. So, if you see something wrong with the balance of Age 3, you can blame me, but man, we tried hard to make sure it didn't happen. And that is my story.
And a very nice story indeed. Quite an interesting history, too, since I didn't have any idea that's sort of how they went about developing the Age of Empires 3 game. I assumed basically you sort of took the building blocks from Age of Mythology, since if you look around in the old bar files, you see a lot of graphics. It looks like old Age of Mythology in there, and then you just sort of tried to make it sort of like the strengths of Age of Mythology, while sort of bringing back some of the older type concepts from AoE 2, like shared unit rosters and stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, you're correct. Well, see, what was going on is we were doing Age of Mythology and Age 3 at the same time. We basically were so big we could have two teams. Age of Mythology came out earlier because Age 3 was took longer to do, basically, because we took that extra year to make it fun. I did some stuff on Age of Mythology. I would run playtests and stuff, but I wasn't as deeply involved as I was with Age 3. And yeah, we copied stuff back and forth and shared things everywhere. It was the complete opposite of Electronic Arts. In Electronic Arts, the teams treat their innovations and stuff as industry secrets, and they literally sabotage each other's projects. But Ensemble, we were all on the same page and friendly, so it was a much nicer environment.
Yeah, I definitely think that's very important, since we all saw how Star Wars Battlefront 2 went out with EA, and that was definitely an interesting situation, to say the least.
Let's see. The most, actually, of all the work I did on the Age of Empires series, the very thing I was most proud of in the entire series was doing the Warchiefs.
Oh, interesting, because if I remember correctly, somebody was sort of wondering about the fire pit concept, and sort of where did you come up with that idea from originally?
So what was going on is that I had to organize, really, it was really, took a lot of effort on my part, and getting the team behind me, and getting all the teams behind me all the way up to get the Warchiefs approved, because the bosses from Microsoft on down all were like, well, obviously we should do Asians, but that was dumb. I said we didn't have Asians colonizing the world. I mean, I'm not saying the Chinese or Koreans couldn't have, but they didn't. So I wanted to have it be, Native Americans. I thought Native Americans were obviously cool, but they had to be really different from the Europeans. I knew I would only do 3 because they would have to have almost completely new units, so that took a lot of art. And the fire pit I did as a way of, I did 2 things. They got the Warchief, and they got the fire pit. And the fire, these are the 2 things to make them feel, from the very first part of the game, really different from the European civs. The fire pit seemed kind of Indianish to me, maybe that's a stereotype, but it gave them a cool bonus that they could swap to or out of when they needed, benefits. And then the Warchief meant they can run around and Greg Street had earlier added what we called the creeps in Age 3, where you'd go somewhere and there'd be pirates or a bear, and if you killed it, you can get some treasure or something, right? And the war chief gave you a way of taking real advantage of that, so you felt like you were more native to the to the land than the Europeans, who had to work harder to figure out how to take advantage of the land. I can't remember by now exactly where the fire pit came from, why I thought of it. I think I was looking for a way to give the Native Americans a ongoing bonus that wasn't permanent, that would have some kind of cost to it. And of course, the cost is that everyone dancing at the fire pit isn't like gathering wood or whatever. So that was the plan. I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, from what I understand from a gameplay standpoint, I know a lot of people that love the Native Americans, particularly the Haudenosaunee and the Lakota, just because they're able to really leverage that fire pit at really opportune times, whether it's using the attack dance and just getting a really tough army, or if you're doing the siege dance like the Lakota and you're just shredding buildings down within seconds.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, I'm going to give up my production to annihilate these guys, and I thought that was a really fun choice for players to make. It's all about players getting choices, right? I want players to always have two options they can pick, or at least two, and neither one is obviously the right choice, at any given time. So when a player says, "What should I do here?" my answer can always be, "Well, it depends." Kind of like in Age 2 when you say, should I go for archers or cavalry? And it's like, well, it depends. There's a lot of things that affect that decision. Same is true of in Age 3.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably many different ways that Native Americans could have turned out, but definitely the fire pit was a pretty solid idea, because if I remember correctly, one of the mods that I do a lot of streaming and advertisement and preview stuff for, Wars of Liberty, sort of had two separate Native Americans. You had the North American ones that still used the fire pit, and then when it came to generating XP or faith or whatever, they would just build totem poles to do that. And then in the South, you had the Latin American natives, basically the Inca, the Tupi, and the Mapuche, and what they ended up having instead was this thing called a monument, which instead of being a fire pit, basically it served all the functions of a church building. But what it could also do is it actually was the first concept of rechargeable god powers before we got Age of Mythology retold. So depending on which age you were in, you could either call down a rainstorm over your villagers to improve their farming rate. You could basically start a forest fire sort of thing where an actual fire would appear and it could actually spread to nearby buildings, and you'd use some sort of...
assign natives to it to increase or decrease it, or is this an ongoing permanent effect?
Well, basically, back in those days, there was a concept called faith and religion. So you could actually take your villagers to gather faith at the building and sort of, gather it just like you would a farm. So you would generate faith and either train priests or research upgrades, and occasionally a civ might have a unit or something that might cost a bit of faith as well. We don't have faith anymore since they ended up taking the faith resource out and replacing it with oil. So they could have the oil resource as a fourth one you would use in the Great War Age in World War I to build things like tanks, planes, submarines, and stuff.
Wow, we were out of World War I for Age 4. That was the idea. We go from the Civil War to World War I.
Oh, right.
And I will say that, yeah. So I will say that we were looking at... I did look at the Incas for the Warchiefs, and if we could have had a fourth Native American civ, it would have been the Incas. And of course, they would have had a fire pit like everyone else, because I wasn't going to change that. But the Incas were the obvious next one, and when we decided not to have the Incas and they dropped off, I dropped the Incas instead of one of the others because the Aztecs are just super cool. We don't know as much about the Incan army, so I'd have to make up almost everything. And the Incans collapsed even faster than the Aztecs, so they really, vanished quickly. The civs I picked for the Warchiefs, I picked the Iroquois because they were early on and they were cool and they kind of paralleled the white man they had a conquering empire. They had siege. They had advanced siege techniques. They used rifles right from the start. Well, not rifles, but muskets and rifles. They would be like, they weren't like the Europeans exactly, but they were relatable. And then the Aztecs, I had to have the Aztecs because the Aztecs are like super awesome, and I love the Aztecs. And they would be the most alien and different civ, which would be cool. And then the Lakota, the Sioux were like the intermediate race. And they were also the late game one in a sense. So you have like the Aztecs from the white man first comes across. You have the Iroquois kind of in the late 1700s, and then you have the Lakota as the late game Indians. And plus, I also had a total infantry civ as the Aztecs, a more European style civ with balanced civ with the Iroquois, and then a heavy cavalry civ with the Lakota, and that was all my logic. And the Incans, if I'd done them, they would have been like a wacky civ with all kinds of weird abilities, because they probably would have had an emperor unit that walked around and made decrees, kind of like the Pharaoh in Age of Mythology.
Oh yeah, basically I was pretty surprised that Definitive Edition never added that type of unit to their Inca Civ, but Wars of Liberty ended up doing it with theirs, where you sort of had the Emperor as the main hero that was basically immortal and couldn't die, and then he would train the Chazquai messengers to actually gather the treasures and do the fighting of the treasure guardians for him, and you could have up to 10 of them to sort of handle that for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that the Warchief is sort of like that. You can resurrect him, right, when he's wounded, and get him back, or go heal him. So he sort of did the same function. So the Emperor wouldn't have been that different. He would have basically been like a super Warchief, And I think what I would have done with the Aztec Emperor when I started is I would have had you be able to use. I think he would have been your fire pit. So you would have had your villagers accompanying him and worshiping him. And that would have been made the Incans interestingly different.
Oh yeah, most definitely. What do you think of the current Inca that they did in Definitive Edition?
I have not played them, so I don't have an opinion. I think that it's one thing that kind of bugs me about the modern stuff they've done at Age of Empires is that they seem to can't get out of the rut of what we did and do. Like when we finished Age of Empires 3, we were absolutely certain that the next game we did was going to be Age of Empires 4, and it was going to go Civil War through World War 1. And then the one after that was going to be World War II up to like Vietnam. And then we were going to do a futuristic space game. And we were just going to keep going through the ages. Now, there was a debate. People thought, well, if we can't figure out how to do the Civil War through World War I, maybe we should go back to Age of Empires 1 again and redo that. And that was a discussion we were having about doing that and like doing Age of Empires 1, except with the awesome 3D art we had for Age 3 and everything we'd learned about balancing units and stuff. I mean, that would have been a pretty killer Age 1.
Oh, and it was actually done before. There was Age of Empires 3 modder who created Age of Empires 1 HD edition and actually formally brought AoE 1 into the AoE 3 visuals.
There you go.
Yep.
Using the Bang engine, yeah. But I can't help but think that if we had like the team we had on Age 3 working on that Age 1, it would have been quite an amazing game. But Microsoft seems to have just like more of the same. Well, let's add Indian civs to it. I mean, I have nothing against the Indian. I'm not talking about, Hindu civs. I have nothing against those, but it's just add the Asian civs. They aren't. We wanted to do things that were interesting and different. And so the big reason that we stalled on doing Age of Empires 4 from Civil War to World War I was a problem we had, which is that in Age of Empires 1, you have essentially primitive Stone Age people forming a civilization going on up into the Iron Age, right? Then in Age of Empires 2, you have the Rome has collapsed, so kind of civilization is starting again. So again, you have a town center, some guys, you work your way up. Then in Age of Empires 3, you're colonizing a new world. So again, town center and some guys, you work your way up. But we couldn't figure out a way to make that logical in Age of Empires 4. Everyone would already have a country. You
Oh,
couldn't. It makes no sense to start with a town center and a bunch of guys. So our starting situation, and we were pretty wedded to our opening game in Age of Empires and how strong that was. So that was like the big puzzle. That how do we get that starting civilization going? We're trying to figure out ways that we can start the game. Basically, so to speak, in feudal or castle age. So you already had an empire going, and then you go into the game. But it was hard to work that out, and that's one of the reasons we were thinking of going back to Age 1.
yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think in some ways, after hearing that, the way the Wars of Liberty team sort of made the Age of Empires for the one that you were thinking of in that make a bit more sense because they started sort of, I guess, around maybe the Napoleonic Wars or a little bit before that. You still have age up options like George Washington and Ben Franklin with the United States, and then they extended it all the way into World War One with the Sixth Age, the Great War Age, with the latest reference or Easter egg showing up there actually being the Bolshevik Revolution with Lenin, is some wacky revolt you could do with the Russians. That's as far they went with that. And basically the way it progresses is you start out like you would in Age of Empires 3 with the town center and villagers, and it sort of is like that all the way to Age 5, be it with more modern units here and there, like definitely a lot more machine gun type things, a lot more Gatlings, a lot more modern types of boats and so forth. But once you get into Great War Age, you still have the town center there you've already established, but in order to utilize World War One, you basically train trucks from the town center, about 500 wood basically, and then you take the trucks and you build these supply depots, sort of these command posts with them, and then once you build that, they act as nodes that you can build other things onto them. So you can build a army tent or a field barracks to put your sort of infantry and cavalry into it. You get a assembly line to build tanks, armored cars, machine guns, World War One type artillery, as well as even, depending on what civ you are, either a machine gun camel, machine gun elephant, or somebody using some sort of motorcycle in the case of the Africans. Or you could build a airfield to either build fighter planes, bomber planes, or even a Zeppelin that can act as sort of the bomber, but it can also drop mustard gas over a wide arcing area and just destroy all the units still on the field there and wipe it clean for like 60 seconds. It's very powerful. And then after that, the last thing that they had was a shipyard to either build submarines, a mine layer so you could actually put aquatic mines on the water that could actually blow up when a boat goes over it, or a full dreadnought battleship, this huge hulking boat that's very big, sort of like the battleships we got in Definitive Edition, but it's a World War one with all iron on and everything. And you see the turrets sort of swivel when they go into place and starts destroying the entire area. And then the last thing that they add too to counteract the aircraft was an anti-aircraft gun, because originally when they were going to design the Great War Age for Wars of Liberty, they were going to just have it so units on the ground could fight the planes and shoot at the planes and stuff, because it was very bare bones and basic. But what they ended up doing was they created this sort of rule that no units could attack aircraft except anti-aircraft guns on the ground that were basically trained to be able to shoot at them, or fire planes could also use their machine guns on their planes to sort of fight the other aircraft. Those are the only two modes allowed to do it, so there's sort of a closed restriction on how the aircraft can behave.
That all sounds like a really contorted way of fitting it into the age game. It seems what I would have wanted to do is start from scratch. Like I would like. For the modern age thing, I would just take wood out of the mix. No one was suffering for a lack of wood in World War One, or in the Civil War. Let's go straight to coal, which you can upgrade to oil and steel, and gold as your resources. And I would probably get rid of the town center entirely, because the town center makes no sense for the modern nations that you have in the latter half of the 19th century. I guess I'm just saying I would have done it differently. Well, of course I would. That doesn't mean the way they did it is like the bad way. It just means that different designers emphasize different things. Um, Mine would probably feel less like a continuation of the old Age of Empires, and that has to be decided if that's good or bad. When Age of Empires 3 came out, it was seen as a big jump from the old Age of Empires, and it was, some people dumped on it because of that. It did sell less than Age of Empires 2, but Age of Empires 2 was a unicorn. It sold incredibly fabulously, and and I don't think it was a unique thing that sort of not lucked out, but was went crazy. And so we didn't expect Age 3 or Age 4 or those to be the same as Age 2. As long as they sold, 3 or 4 million copies and made us lots of money, we were happy. And that's what Age 3 and Age of Mythology did. We never lost money on anything. We were always highly profitable. We came the closest to losing money on Halo Wars, but we didn't in the end. Well, we did, I guess, because we were all fired before the money came in, and Microsoft got the money.
Yeah, pretty interesting how that all turned out. Is there any sort of other stuff you'd like the viewers to know about you and the design work you did?
I'm very proud of the design work. I'm happy to have worked in Age 3. Um, I'm currently doing tabletop board games mostly and role-playing games, but I will say that the techniques I learned in balancing Age of Empires, particularly, I have carried on to my board games. So, for example, just like in Age of Empires, we started playtesting early and often. That's how I do the board games. The techniques I learned in balancing the Strelets versus the just named Strelets versus Russians, really, versus the Iroquois versus the Sioux. I use those on my asymmetrical tabletop games. So the stuff I got from working on Age of Empires, I have absolutely carried forward and used in my current career, and I'm proud of having worked on that. One thing I will say is that the like when I worked on I worked on Doom and Quake, of course, those were famously successful. And but I'll say that when a new really good shooter comes out, the shooter people will will stop playing their current shooter and go on to the next. But when when Age 3 came out, we were still selling hundreds of copies of Age 1 every month. It was like free money poured in, and thousands of copies of Age 2. So people that played RTS games are loyal, and they keep playing those things forever in a way that other types of video games don't seem to have that same loyalty. But man alive, RTS games, they resonate somewhere in people's soul, I guess. And I'm thrilled to know that.
That is definitely true.
I have.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true, since I know people that played the Age games since the late 90s when they came out, and they still talk about them to this day and still do them with me. So quite a good set of games you did between Age 1 and Age 3, I would say.
It was quite the experience. I worked longer at Ensemble than any other company I'd ever worked at, so I learned the most from them. Well, I guess I've worked longer at my current company, Petersen Games, but that doesn't really count because I'm the founder. But yeah, I loved Ensemble. Ensemble was such a great team to get along with. It was every company has its own personality. And Ensemble was a band of brothers and sisters, I guess, where everyone liked everyone else, everyone got along. One of the requirements we had for hiring someone new was the thought of, if the elevator breaks when I'm in it with this person, and I'm stuck there for 3 hours with them, would we have something interesting to talk about? That was actually one of our hiring requirements, and we hired someone that was considered. And it did make it hard to hire new people because we couldn't take just anybody. But when we had the lowest turnover I've ever seen in any company, we lost like one guy voluntarily quit in 11 years. A couple of guys involuntarily were fired, right, or laid off, but no one wanted to leave Ensemble. It was just like, the best work environment. And that may have been why our games retained that luster. Thank you for this discussion. It looks like we're almost out of time, I guess.
Yeah.
And we can another time for more of these.
Oh, do you have time for episode 2, or?
I have time. You said you had to go somewhere else.
Well, at 2 p.m., so we can happily do another one now.
Sure, let's do it.
Alright, let me...
Hour session, so this will be a...
Alright, so I'll close this one now and we can go into the next one.